Alright, so we congregate here again to talk matters love, sex, and relationships. Although, for this episode, we are going to take a little bit more of a feminist approach because we are going after the patriarchy. At least in some way, considering that there's a bunch of things that some people used to refer to as part of the patriarchal system that we just kind of need to tackle a little bit. Although at the same time, there is something about the women and addictions that I need to talk about for a little bit. Although for the most part, considering that this is the last episode of like the last 12 weeks that I've done before I go on break, I feel like this episode just should have a little bit more of a relaxed sense to it. Try not to be as serious as it normally tends to be sometimes. And, try and just relax a little bit. And considering that we are tackling the patriarchy on this episode, I might as well start things off by tackling the more fun side of the patriarchy by talking about how, considering that this is a leap year, there's actually an Irish tradition which allows women to propose to their men, which, when I kind of think about it, might actually be the thing that we really need, especially regarding one of the tweets that I'll be discussing later on, because we go through so much as men just trying to ensure that we get a woman to be a wife that honestly, if we offloaded some of the work to her, it would probably make this whole marriage thing a little bit better of an idea for a lot of guys. Although then again, before she proposes, there are certain things that I'd want her to tell me. Like, if after head she decides to tell me,
"The royal penis is clean, Your Highness."
Are you telling me that as a dude you wouldn't want to hear that from your babe? Like, I never used to be about the whole name calling or like fancy statements that people say in the bedroom, but of late, I've actually been seeing the absolute value of things like these. And then again, I'm mostly justifying all of this shit because that's the intro sound. But anyways, that's sort of besides the point. So back to what I was saying. So there's an old Irish tradition that was being highlighted by the female influencer known as Oloni, which allows women to break the patriarchal standard, giving women the opportunity to propose to a guy on a leap year. And I'm gonna let her talk about it for a little bit. So here it is.
Propose to your man this year. Would you do it? Did you know that due to this year being a leap year, an old Irish tradition allows women to propose to their boyfriend once every 4 years on February 29th? It's also said that technically women in heterosexual relationships are supposed to ask the guy to be their Valentine. So tell me, would you propose or would you ask the guy to be your Valentine this year? If you want to know more about the tradition, keep watching. The story dates back to the 5th century where St. Bridget of Kildare went to St. Patrick after feeling as though men seemed shy and not enough were proposing to women. He then said, fine, once every 7 years, I will allow women to propose to men. And she was just like, what? Once every 7 years? Nah, that's not enough.
I lose and I burn this house down.
I'm sorry, that's just way too long. He said, fine, once every 4 years, on February 29th, women are allowed to ask men for their hand in marriage. She said, okay, that's cool. And then she got down on one knee and tried to propose to him, to which he declined and said, nah, he wasn't on it, okay? But instead, he bought her a nice silk gown to replace her lack of an engagement ring.
I'm sure if Kenyan women were given the opportunity to propose to their guys or to ask them to be their Valentines, this wouldn't even be a debate for shit. Just mostly because I know that there's a bunch of women who are like, but we already asked them. Why the hell do we also have the option of like proposing to them as well? Because a lot of Nairobi women, as Valentine's was busy drawing near, were busy asking their partners, were busy talking about, they expect this and that gift, this and that gift. And guys started feeling that pressure, Women weren't necessarily directly saying that, what are you getting me for Valentine's? But it's not like that pressure wasn't there. And as Valentine's progressed nearer and nearer, and hell, even on Valentine's Day, now that's when I think a lot more guys started hearing that question, where they were like, what are you getting me for Valentine's? Which I think for a lot of Nairobi women is their way of saying, will you be my Valentine? Which honestly, I feel just put a shit ton of guys under very unnecessary pressure. Although then again, I'm one of the people that usually doesn't give a shit about the holiday. Although as a guy who would be very curious to see what it would be like when a woman would propose to him, I'm actually very curious of what it'll be like for some people on the 29th of Feb, considering that this episode comes out on the 27th, if I'm not wrong. Although, then again, considering that the chances of that happening in Kenya are between 0 and nada, I'll just kind of leave it at that, because I should have started with a little bit more reality, because we know these Kenyan women aren't going to propose to us, and just start in a much nicer way by saying, welcome to the Breaktime Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit. The man on the mic is a man who looks forward to a woman proposing to him, because for the very first time, her wedding bells will be right next to my jingle bells. He's a man who likes his women the same exact way he likes his yogurt. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. This episode has quite a bit to talk about, not enough time, but either way, I intend on having nothing but fun on it. And, talk about tweets and shit. And by all means, considering that this is the final episode of the season, it's not like it's over. There is a short series that I'll be doing for the next 2, possibly 3 weeks, just shortened episodes, no instrumentals, minimal editing, just me talking about some shit. It's usually like one topic an episode. It's usually like 12 to 15 minutes, and it's usually me in a more introspective sense, and should give some room to give feedback, think about things from your end, but also gives me a chance to take a break from all of this, so that I can get some R&R before I come back and continue doing more episodes. And as I work towards that, because the episode is still running, I do need to get into the tweets, of which, if you do have tweets that you would want me to discuss, even as I'm on break, you can still send them over, because the drill is pretty simple, almost sounds like a song, and it goes like this. You see that tweet, you like that tweet, you want us to discuss that tweet, you send that tweet. You send it to the DMs of @BagakaTheD, which happens to be my personal Twitter handle, and I will take it from there and I will handle it accordingly. If it happens to be on Facebook or on IG, if it's a screenshot, a screen grab, or ended up on a reel, then the place to send it to on IG, it is at the Breaktime_podcast, and on Facebook it is at the Breaktime Podcast, and I will take it from there and handle it accordingly. Now, with all of those pleasantries said and done, I do really need to get to the tweets, because I have definitely eaten into some time. But before I can get into that, we need to talk about something that was trending over this past week, which I found to be particularly peculiar for quite a number of women. And it was this, can I call it a TikTok series, or just a series, or just a range of TikToks, which was entitled "Who the Fuck Did I Marry?" And it was this woman who was busy talking about how she married a pathological lie of a husband, of which she recently got divorced, and she spoke about how she met him, what he said, and the fact that, she was led into being with this man under false pretenses, and all of a sudden, a couple of months into the marriage, realizing that dude isn't who he said he was, his job isn't what he said it is, and he's sort of been living this lie, which to a massive degree did actually really affect her. Now, she didn't say the guy's real name, she just gave him the nickname Legion, of which she chose that nickname, and I kid you not, this was her actual reason for choosing that nickname, because in the Bible there's someone who is referred to as Legion because he had a swarm of demons inside of him. Like, that shit is wild. I don't know what the hell dude did beyond lying about who he is and what he does and, his entire persona as a person, but is it really worth calling him the biblical definition of a swarm of demons though? I don't know. Anyways, I didn't bother checking out the entire series because honestly, I honestly felt like that shit could have been a waste of time for me because I just don't resonate with that kind of content. But I found it particularly odd that there were so many women, and I kid you the hell not, millions of women were so invested in this entire story all the way till the end. And normally, you know how whenever you're on Reels or TikToks and you're seeing a part 1 and then you look for the part 2, the part 3, the part 4, and a lot of people usually hate that shit. They go all the way till maybe part 4, part 5, and a lot of people will kind of zone out in part 2. People went all the way till part 50. This series went all the way till part 50. And even though I didn't actually go and check out all of the parts, I actually found a video where someone had all of the parts combined as a compilation so that you can follow it non-stop. And that shit went for a grand total of 5 hours. How the fuck am I supposed... 5 hours. And there were women who are investing their entire day, days even, if they didn't manage to get enough time. But you find a babe sitting in traffic, sitting in public transportation, in between work, over lunch break. Women are just following this story from part 1 all the way till part 50. And with the way it was so consuming in terms of time and the way women were so invested up until like they were even talking about it on stories and posting up about it, I honestly came to the conclusion that women are either emotional whores or emotional addicts when you kind of think about it. And yes, maybe this might seem like common knowledge, but I feel like this was the nail in the coffin that sort of concluded my entire idea that women are emotional addicts or emotional whores, if you can call it that. I'm still not sure on which one of the two I should really give it, but it kind of justifies a lot of content that they consume and, why they consume what they consume. Because you kind of think about it. If, for me as a guy, like, if I was checking out a bunch of things like this and it's like 50 parts, I'd have probably gotten to like part 10 and I'd have been like, yo, shorty, if you didn't leave this nigga, then I don't know what the fuck you're doing. And I'd have tuned the fuck out. And women will just stick along for the entire 50 parts and then talk about how toxic this man was. Yet there's nothing to add, nothing to subtract, and nothing that they'll actually utilize from this entire story to make their lives a little bit better. Because, like, for me as a guy, and I tend to believe this is mostly a guy thing, we tend to be people of action. So if I watch, say, for example, a Lin Ngugi video, or I'm listening to Adele Onyango's podcast, which can sometimes have particularly emotional stories, like, yo, I usually listen to that shit, and by like halfway, I'm already ready to act. I'm like, yo, do we need to find this guy and take him to justice? Do we need to help this person find a job? Because I look at a problem and I try to think of ways that I can help out in solving it. But babes are usually just stand there like, oh my goodness, this is so bad. Oh wow, he was treating you like this. Oh my goodness. Like, look at this guy. When I was checking out the story, he was so toxic, but now she's going back to him because she feels like she loves him and she wants to give him another chance. Honestly, I think the relationship is toxic. Oh well. Anyways, babes, how are you? And I'm like, how the hell doesn't this shit anger you to a point of actually acting? And annoying as it might seem, it actually does kind of justify quite a number of things, because when you kind of think about it, the whole bad boy persona, it became a thing because of this. Because women gravitated towards the bad guys in movies and they talk about how they like them, and guys now started to try and be like those bad boys. And those bad boys usually tended to be some sort of multi-layered personalities that would sometimes be rebellious but be extremely loving, but also be a bit toxic and make sure that there's a little bit of drama and would cheat on this person, but would be this loving person that would find every way possible to show his love or some shit like that. And you'd find that a lot of women would gravitate towards guys like this in series and movies, to the point that us as men actually studied these characters and decided to pick up some of those personality traits. And now we're in a position where we are actually those characters, and women are saying that they want nice guys, they want good men. So you're like, shorty, but these are the kinds of people that you're really interested in. But I will kind of leave it at that because I have tweets to get into, and at least this first one actually goes back to the whole hitting on women. So let me move it on. So on to our very first tweet of this episode, and this one was actually put up by a guy, and I found it to be particularly interesting. So he says, and I quote, "The concept of chasing women is so much funnier when you break it down. You're begging someone to let you spend your money on them. Oh, and it doesn't matter how many niggas already had her either. Still an honor." End quote. Okay, when I read this tweet, I actually found it to be particularly funny, just mostly because it seems very ironic. Like, you as a guy, you're putting in all of this work, you're trying to get this babe, you're trying to do whatever it takes so that you can get shorty, just so that you can spend more money, and then you can go down on your knees and ask her to be your wife, of which you are pretty much asking her to agree to possibly take half of your shit, blah blah blah, whatever the hell the red pill says, blah blah. Like, it actually does seem kind of funny when you think about it in this sense, but when you think about a lot of things in this sort of logical direction, it doesn't seem to make sense all that much. It's kind of like, when you think of football using the same rationale, it's 22 players on the pitch, of which 20 are moving around freely, there's 2 that aren't, and the entire time they're kicking a piece of leather with air in it, trying to get it at the back of each other's nets. it doesn't sound particularly serious. Although when you think about it, or at least when I try to assume the thought process, for people who are, from the older times, then maybe I could try and derive some sense of, sense around this entire thing. Because, the concept of chasing the babe is, there's a guy that's trying to start his family and he's looking for someone that would be a great homemaker. So, of course, he's going to look for someone who has particularly good features, but still, with all of that, you want this really beautiful woman that's a complete package of everything. And that's what every guy desires. And of course, you're going to try and get the best package that's out there. And because a bunch of guys want her, then you're going to go ahead and chase. And because you're gonna go and chase, when you finally win, or at least when she chooses to be with you, you'll flaunt her. You're willing to take up operational costs that comes with her being with you. So, if you're going to flaunt her, you buy her dresses, you get her flowers, you treat her like this queen, this princess that she really wants to be treated like, so that she can stick by you. And you'd think that this behavior is only with, people from back in the day who were busy trying to get married and shit, and, maybe even today. But it goes even beyond just trying to get a wife. Like, think of the people that are trying to get a Bugatti or even a Rolls Royce or maybe even a Pagani. Like, you find that because they're in such limited stock and these amazing works of art, these amazing machines, you just going there with money doesn't cut it. You have to go there, you have to show that you're worth being a part of the brand and a part of this club of people that own the cars. And then you get the car and then the car can break, and then you pay a shit ton of money for fairly normal car parts that shouldn't be costing that much. And at the end of the day, you just end up flaunting this shit and not necessarily utilizing all of its power. Like, that's kind of the same thing to a certain degree. Which is why I think, especially in today's day and age, there's a lot less of trying to beg the woman to be yours so you can blow a bunch of stack on her. Nowadays, there's a lot more of trying to appeal to each other from a more equal ground. Like, you want this shorty, but you're like, you know what, even though she says no, or if she wants me to put in too much work, fuck that shit, I'm still a fine ass nigga, I can go and pick up another babe or some shit like that. Everyone is busy trying to reevaluate their values so that they don't have to beg, which is particularly good, and in my opinion is probably a more optimal way to look at dating, just mostly because there's a lot more equality in the world today. And honestly, the previous thing, it seemed very heteronormative, but that's one of the things that just pushes the patriarchy forward, which we don't want because we are feminists. And to be quite honest, like, I personally look at relationships as an investment. So technically, I'd be looking at it as me investing in a possible woman. So I'm willing to put in a certain amount, but I don't want to overvalue my investment, because there's a lot of guys that overvalue this one babe and they spend so much money, and then when they realize that this baddie is, good for nothing, all of a sudden they're like shit. At the same time, you also don't want to undervalue your investment or, your babe, because there's also particularly shit guys that will treat a babe like shit, yet the babe is so good and probably deserves a little bit more investment in one way or another. So I'll always be reevaluating and looking at the value of the babe. But in all of it, I'll always go back to that very first rule of investing. Don't invest what you're not willing to lose. Although maybe that's just a me thing. Anyways, with that said and done, I am going to leave this tweet and move it on to the very next tweet of our episode. And this one is particularly interesting because this one is actually a reply to another tweet. So the original tweet says, and I quote, "Single mothers and deadbeats are the ones that make society become properly dysfunctional. A good family setup builds a society, which in turn builds up a nation." End quote. To which dude replies, because it's actually a guy who replied this, and said, and I quote, "It's unfair to put single mothers and deadbeats in the same category because one is optional and one isn't. Being a deadbeat is what brings about single motherhood. Simple causation." End quote. And here's the thing, alright? You could probably come against the deadbeats and be like, oh, being a deadbeat was a choice, blah, blah, blah. But I beg to differ. Mostly because I've heard stories, I've listened to people talk about stuff like this, and some deadbeats aren't deadbeats by, choosing to do it. They're deadbeats by circumstance, in that they're having so many issues with the baby mom, or the baby mom is weaponizing the kids against him, or the baby mom is being nothing but a problem and it's affecting his peace of mind. Or, maybe the baby mom was actually just trying to fleece the guy and use him for money and shit like that. Of which, in that case, I can totally understand where setting some distance so that you can at least, be there for yourself and find some sort of peace and some sense of happiness and clarity can actually make sense. But even with all of that to defend maybe a small subset of deadbeats, I'd still say that whatever the hell dude was replying and saying wasn't entirely true. Because saying that single moms, didn't have the whole option of being single moms is probably a little bit misleading and very, very lenient to single moms. And don't get me wrong, single moms have been receiving strays for years online, and it's not great to pick on them and to hit at them. It's just that for the sake of this particular argument, I kind of need to take, the not so nice side out of all of this. Because the reality of it is, there's a lot of single moms that are single moms by choice. Yes, that choice might not have been conscious and it might not have been a pre-planned choice, but it was a choice that was made after the pregnancy. And you find that for some of these men, they were made a father without their choosing. Like, they pretty much went, they banged the chick said that she's pregnant, he wasn't for the idea of keeping the kid, shorty decided to go beyond dude and have the kid, and now the dude is expected to provide by default. Now, you can go back and say, oh, the man had a choice, he could have worn a condom, he could have pulled out, he could have done blah blah blah, but still, at the end of the day, if you're going to make that argument for him, you can make the argument for the woman as well. So technically, both are to blame and both made a choice when making the kid, doing the do. But when it comes to the whole single parenthood thing, you can always argue out that it was a choice for both sides. Now, the whole, whose choice was it, whether to stay and, cohabit together, or, if they were going to be together and possibly get married, or just maybe co-parent and take care of the kid as separate entities. You can argue that shit out and it'll vary from individual to individual, but at the end of the day, the whole single parenthood thing, it still comes down to a choice. So whether the choice was whether going raw or wearing a condom or using birth control, whether the choice is going to be whether we should keep the kid or not, whether the choice is going to be I need you to provide this much for the child or not, or you need to be around for the kid or not, at the end of the day, all of single parenthood comes down to choices. And unfortunately, in all of those choices, there's going to be that one choice that was made that messed up everything and led you towards being a single parent. Whether that was going in raw or not taking birth control, whether it was choosing to keep the kid, whether it's the guy being told that he's going to have the kid and not being able to take care of the kid, whatever choice was that along the entire process, there is going to be one choice that made one of you a single parent and you didn't intend on doing it. Either way, I might be wrong about all of this shit, so I'm going to leave it at that and move it on to our very final tweet of this episode and even this season, and it's actually a reply to another tweet which had originally said, and I quote, "What's your unpopular opinion?" end quote, to which a lady replied and said, and I quote, "Birth control should be for men. It should have always been for men," end quote. And here's the thing, I don't want to agree with this, not because I have anything against women, not because of anything that some of you might actually be thinking. It's actually a very wild reason that I'll say is only for this episode. But before I can get into any of that, let me just say, if birth control was for guys, we would have that shit in some very, very different ways. Now, granted, by birth control, I'm going to assume that she means the pill, not the entire list of methods, because there are birth control methods for guys, but considering that she's talking about it as if guys don't have methods, I'm gonna kind of look at it as just the pill itself. If it was for us guys, we'd have done so much more with that shit. We'd have found ways to kill the side effects. We'd have probably had that shit flavored and in different colors, almost like Skittles. So we'd probably even be able to pop that shit at any given time. If it was like the one a day pill in the morning or in the evening, we'd make sure that that shit is flavored differently. So you wake up in the morning and you even enjoy taking that shit. Like, we'd have even made it so convenient that we walk around with it almost at any given time. And the thing is, you'd think that guys wouldn't do all of this, but look at condoms. Like, we do that shit with condoms. Condoms come in all manner of varieties. You will find the thin ones, you will find the thicker ones, you will find the ones that will be ribbed, you'll find the ones which are dotted, you'll find those ones that are flavored, and hell, if you look hard enough, you can find some that even glow in the dark. So, do you honestly think that guys would suffer all that badly if us guys are the ones that were taking birth control? Like, you can clearly see that we're finding new and interesting ways to make it more palatable for more guys. So, when you kind of think about it, if we were the ones that were taking birth control, y'all would be complaining about something else. And like I said earlier, my reasons for disagreeing with whatever the hell it is that she's saying isn't even down to what some people might think. It's not the science to it, oh, you know, it's one egg versus hundreds of millions of sperm. Like, it's not anything related to that. It's not about the hormonal imbalances or the issues with hormones and the likelihoods of depression that guys would get if they got that shit. It's not even about all of that. My wanting to disagree but inability to disagree with her actually just comes down to one thing, and that's patriarchy. Because imagine if guys were the ones that were taking the birth control pill, which would mean that we'd be the ones deciding whether the babe gets pregnant or not. She'd just be sticking to safe days and shit. And of course, there's other like various forms of birth control, you know, like the female condoms, anal. Like, there's definitely other methods that could be employed. But if guys are the ones who are taking the birth control pill, which was like the original contraceptive pill way back in the day, like, feminists would be losing their shits. You'd be hearing them in the streets and on media stations every single day busy talking about why should a man have agency of a woman's body and her choice to give birth and her ability to give birth? Why do men have so much power? This is as a result of the patriarchy that is just oppressing women. All of you men who have male privilege like this, because you guys can get the pill, allows you to now oppress your woman because you can decide when she gets to have a kid and not if she wants to have a kid. You can't let her decide to have that option, and you'd much rather have that so that she can be under your boot so that you can continue to oppress her. And as pointless as the argument seems at this point in time where women are complaining about birth control, it would make a shit ton of sense if we had a reality where such a thing was the actual reality. Because you think about it, like, even right now, women don't want men deliberating on abortion laws because a man should not decide what a woman gets to do with her body. And this is abortion. Like, it's not even the contraceptive. This is, in case of danger, should we break glass or should we just run outside and just hope for the best in terms of the future? Like, we are still having those debates, and this is in line with the fact that women still have access to birth control and even more contraceptive methods than men do. So you really think that giving men the power of the birth control pill will make things better? Yeah, sorry. That shit isn't going to work on a socio-political level. Although, then again, maybe I'm wrong about all of this and men need to start taking the pill, not women. But either way, I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open. On X, it is at Bagaka the D. On Facebook and on IG, it is at the Breaktime_podcast and the Breaktime Podcast, respectively. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end of this episode and this season. I've still got some more episodes for the next 2 to 3 weeks before we go back in for the new season. So I will catch you guys on the next break.
But what I believe is that if you put a pastor and a prostitute in one room, one is likely to convert the other.